Hey nerds, just Jamie here with
your friend Claude.
And this is Nerd Bomber vs. Movies, the show where movies fight and we pick a winner. Two things we always mention, try to do a little bit quicker each time. First, we use a rubric. We try to be objective with what we're doing here. We're not just pulling scores out of anywhere. The second thing is we don't show the movies on the show. We don't have the kind of money that it would take to do something like that. We usually show you some fun clips or some trailers. Now you may have noticed I didn't say the show where two movies fight because today is a Batman Battle Royal or a BAT-tle Royal. That's right, with the recent release and huge success of the latest Batman movie, The Batman, we thought it was time to throw all the Batman movies into the ring and let the chips fall where they may. Now, if you're watching this show, chances are you've seen the Batman movies, so we're not going to dive quite as deep as we normally would for each one. But we will give you a quick look at the combatants just to give you an idea of what we're talking about here. A couple other things to mention before we actually get started. First, we aren't including animated films because once you start including animated films, including the one everybody is thinking of right now as you watch this, Mask of the Phantasm.
Naturally.
You have to consider Sub-Zero, and then what about Return of the Joker, and then what about Hush, and then what about Red Hood, etc. The DC animated universe is extensive to say the least, so we're just going to probably try to save animation for another day. The second thing, no Snyderverse today. We know. The fact is, tragically, Ben Affleck's Batman never really got his own solo film, so that franchise doesn't really count on what we're talking about here, so them's the breaks. All right, all that said, it's time to look at today's competitors. We'll be right back with the big board. Here it is, the Batman Battle Royal Big Board. Let's take a look. First up, we have Batman 66, as it's known, based on the TV series starring Adam West and Burt Ward as the dynamic duo. The series of movies is satire with a comedic tone that was actually way ahead of its time. It's often misunderstood now as pure camp.
Oh, thought strikes me. So dreadful I scarcely dare give it utterance.
The four of them. Their forces combine.
Holy nightmare!
Batman, could it be?
I don't know. But I think I know where to find a clue. Come on, Robin. To the Batcave. We haven't one moment to lose.
Next up is Batman from 1989, starring Michael Keaton as Batman, Jack Nicholson as the Joker, and Kim Basinger as Vicky Vale. It's directed by Tim Burton and presenting a darker version of the Bat mythos. It was a huge box office smash at the time. It was really the beginning of the modern superhero film adaptation. It started that trend in Hollywood, or restarted it. Next, Batman Returns, another Michael Keaton, Tim Burton joint. This time, Danny DeVito is off-putting but fantastic as the Penguin. Christopher Walken plays a smarmy and snarky businessman named Max Schreck, and Michelle Pfeiffer, oh boy, Michelle Pfeiffer plays Catwoman.
Somebody say fish? I haven't been fed all day.
Eat floor.
Hey, stud. I thought we had something together. Gotta go. Girl talk.
Now, Joel Schumacher joins the party as director of the slightly sillier Batman Forever, starring a new Cape Crusader, Val Kilmer. Jim Carrey and Tommy Lee Jones chew the scenery as the Riddler and Two-Face. Robin is introduced, played by Chris O'Donnell, and Nicole Kidman portrays the ridiculously named Chase Meridian. Schumacher stays on board with Batman and Robin, now diving fully back into cheesy camp with the franchise. We now have George Clooney as Batsy. O'Donnell stays on as Robin, with Arnold Schwarzenegger, Uma Thurman, and Jeep Swenson joining up as Mr. Freeze, Poison Ivy, and Bane.
Get the gun!
Extended break from Hollywood. The character comes back to theaters, though, with director Christopher Nolan at the helm of a new trilogy, starting with Batman Begins. Christian Bale dons the cape and cowl, with Liam Neeson playing Ra's al Ghul and Cillian Murphy as Scarecrow. Michael Caine, Gary Oldman, and Morgan Freeman are Alfred, Jim Gordon, and Lucius Fox.
If you finally learn to do what is necessary, I won't kill you. But I don't have to save you.
Bat film number 2 for Nolan. It is The Dark Knight. Bale, Caine, Oldman, Friedman, they stay on board. Heath Ledger is in a legendary performance here as the new Joker, along with Aaron Eckhart as the new Two-Face. Nolan finishes things up here. Once again, Bale, Caine, Oldman, Freeman are present. Now with Tom Hardy playing Bane and Marion Cotillard playing Talia al Ghul.
Missed the spot.
So there they are, the competitors. We are off for a Bat movie marathon, and when we come back, we'll see who gets thrown over the top rope. All right, we are back with a different version of the Batman Battle Royal big board. You can see a bunch of scores on one side, no indication of what movies they belong to, because that is Claude's job. Claude, take it away.
Who is going to land on which spot?
That's what we're trying to figure out.
That's my best Riddler impression, I guess. That's all I got. But why don't we start with the very lowest score at the very bottom of the board? And, perhaps to the surprise of nobody, that movie with that dubious distinction is Batman and Robin. What can we, or what should we say about Batman and Robin? Well, it earned the lowest scores for a reason. Unfortunately, especially in order of the episodes we put up on YouTube, poor Arnold Schwarzenegger is going to take a beating from us. In the last video, he was our lowest scoring movie ever. And he's done it again.
Broke his own record. Now, he's not the star of this movie, to be fair. There's a lot of other problems you get to before you get to Arnold. But yeah, our show has not been kind to the Austrian Oak so far.
No. It's a Batman movie, and they definitely tried to hit the comedy gas pedal a little too hard.
Yeah.
I think we agreed pretty much. Actually, we scored this movie exactly the same.
We did, yes.
Yeah. Oof. Second lowest in the Bat hierarchy is the other Joel Schumacher movie.
Sorry, Joel.
Batman Forever. And unfortunately, its levels of success didn't last forever. I mean, this was a big deal when it was coming out and like the promotion leading up to it and you know the media blitz and the music on the radio and everybody loves Kiss from a Rose. Most people. Yeah, but the movie itself, it just, for me, it kind of falls flat. It's trying to do a lot of things and it succeeds at one of them.
I think that it's okay. Visually, it's okay. The performances are okay. The writing suffers.
It does.
I think ultimately the mistakes that this movie made, Batman and Robin made even worse. The only thing that makes Batman Forever seem okay is Batman and Robin. So
the movie that came next. Talk about learning backwards from your mistakes. Speaking of going backwards, the third lowest ranking movie on this Bat board is the third Nolan movie, The Dark Knight Rises. I think it's pretty universally agreed that that's everybody's least favorite out of those three movies. And that certainly we're not any exceptions to that.
No.
It's not a terrible movie. It's, big budget, well done. Some impressive moments. I think for me the best part is the opening, the skyjacking sequence.
Absolutely, very memorable.
Yeah, impressive.
I actually like Tom Hardy's performance as Bane. I know there was a lot of jokes about the voice.
It's easily caricatured. Yeah,
it's true, but I thought that he did a good job. Tom Hardy's an amazing actor. But I felt like this movie just kind of rehashed a lot of old material and didn't really present much in the way of anything that was new, that Christopher Nolan didn't seem to be stretching himself.
No, not too much, yeah. Moving up the list, in a comparatively, perhaps surprisingly low spot, is the middle Nolan movie, The Dark Knight, which I think is everybody's favorite Nolan movie for the most part.
Yeah, it definitely is the one that has the most, it has the biggest pop culture footprint probably, it has the most iconic status, it's got a lot of good things going for it, but I think we both agree on, maybe we should save that for the next entry,
yeah.
But I think we both have similar opinions about this movie and the next.
I mean, this one, it got Heath Ledger the Oscar.
Of course.
It's a great movie, very well done. For me, it needed some editing. It's a lot of movie, and it maybe 1.5 movies.
Interesting.
It might be a little too good in that way. Just kind of overwhelms the senses.
I don't disagree.
But there's a reason everybody talks about it, including us. However, one better than that is the first Nolan movie in the trilogy, Batman Begins. That is at least the way that our scoring system kind of shook things out. And it just happens to be my personal favorite of the trilogy. I think it's the most visually beautiful and impressive across the board. And I think it has the most well-rounded, compelling story. It's tight and it's kind of self-contained.
I agree. I think Christian Bale especially has more to do.
Yep.
Because it represents different stages of his development.
Yep.
Like you said, I think some of the visual, it's more interesting visually because it does have a little bit more variety.
Right.
From like training scenes to the city to different areas. Some of the stuff with the scarecrow, fear gas, makes for some interesting visuals that stretch the movie beyond. It's very sort of, all the Nolan movies try to be rooted in the real world. And so the scarecrow stuff kind of pushes it a little bit into the boundaries of more toward comic book, and I kind of appreciate that about the first one.
Yeah. Not afraid to take some risks out of the gate.
No.
Moving up the board, we have Batman Returns, the second of Tim Burton's 2 films, and actually my favorite overall, but clearly not the best Batman movie. Very memorable, also a huge deal as it was coming out, following up its predecessor. Pretty controversial because of the tone that it struck. As you mentioned earlier, the Penguin was a little extreme, and a lot of parents groups kind of agreed and complained to places like McDonald's for trying to market this movie to kids. I mean, I saw it for my 10th birthday, and I was as happy as could be.
Yeah, you're completely right. It did take a lot of chances. I mean, the Batman '89, which we'll talk about in a moment, pushed the superhero genre, especially Batman, into a darker place, inspired by some of the things that were happening in comics at that time. This movie really pushed it into almost a surrealist horror it gets right up to the line of horror.
Right.
With the Penguin, even with some of the things that happen with the Catwoman character.
Right.
Not only what happens to her, but the version of Catwoman that we see is very sort of S&M kink inspired, which is interesting, and again, really taking chances with something that even then, even after something like '89 Batman pushed it into a darker place, a lot of families and parents still would have been expecting this to be a very kid-friendly movie, and that wasn't necessarily the case. Another thing is, sometimes I agree with you that I go back and forth between this one and one of the other movies about which one's my favorite. I go back and forth because one of these movies has a special place in my heart because I watched it younger, and so that one kind of sticks with me at an emotional level.
Right.
And with this movie, Batman Returns, Michelle Pfeiffer's performance as Catwoman, especially, is what sort of attracts me to this movie. She's kind of like my first celebrity crush or whatever, probably because of this. And it's true. What can I say? But
Could have done worse.
It's absolutely right. But it's also, like I said, it's also those elements of sort of like horror that sneak into it. And by the way, Christmas movie.
Yeah. Undisputedly, without dispute, a very solid Christmas movie.
All right. What's next?
Well, next, all the way back to 1966 movie, Adam West's favorite Batman movie, also called Batman. But this is an amazing movie that I actually scored the highest, just barely. And a lot of people probably would be shocked that it gets ranked this highly. A lot of modern people. But really look at
youths.
The youth of today. Really take a look at what this is and what it's trying to be and what it, the era of the comics that it represents and just the overall spirit. And it's perfect. It's perfect in capturing that version of Batman. Mm-hmm. Considering that this is, I mean, at the time it was probably a big budget, but it's still very, it's TV quality with 35 millimeters film, you know? This was made actually originally as the pilot to show before the series launched, but because ABC was doing so poorly with all of their shows, they rushed the show ahead of the movie. But, I mean, this movie takes everything good about the TV series, crams it into a 2-hour experience. So, I mean, you get the greatest hits here, and I think they are great.
They really are. I kind of alluded to it in the intro. This show is largely, I think, misunderstood now.
Right.
People think that it's just cheesy and cheap, and that it's funny, but that it somehow doesn't mean to be funny. No, this show knows exactly what it is. Yeah. This show is being funny on purpose. It's being campy and cheesy on purpose. When Batman knows that the bad guys can no longer fire their weapons because he's been counting their bullets, their machine guns.
Right.
That is on purpose.
Yeah.
Some days you just can't get rid of a bomb. You know, I actually compare it to something like almost Monty Python style humor.
It's not far off.
I think it's pretty close to something like that. I mean, that goes to show you why maybe it wasn't maybe why now it's misunderstood. Because even now, Monty Python's humor from the 60s is not fully appreciated, especially here in the States.
Right.
So I think this show kind of goes overlooked for what it is, which is as a satirical comedy and not really as a cheesy action show.
Right. And it does that classic balancing act of a good family show where, you know, it's very on the surface for the kids and the writing and the humor is there for the adults. There's double entendres and there's things you really have to pay attention to.
Oh yeah, of course.
So it gets a lot of credit.
Yeah.
However, not the top credit. And that spot is reserved for Tim Burton's first Batman movie from 1989. Where is it? Boom. Batman.
There we go.
I mean, it's hard not to put this number one. If you were around at the time, especially, this was the first big screen version of Batman since the 60s Batman movie. And the 60s version of Batman is what people knew all the way up until this came out. And imagine like going from the Adam West version to the Tim Burton movie. And I mean, that's your progression at the time. It blew a lot of people away, and I think that helped it make such a big impression. And again, this kind of does that thing where it's the opposite of the 60s show. On the surface, this really isn't for kids. It's Batman, obviously a kid-appealing character, and we were interested 8-year-olds at the time, 7-year-olds.
Yeah.
It was everywhere. Like every corner store had Batman pins and Gumball Machine items and anything with a Bat logo.
Batmania.
The original Batmania was in the 60s, but this blew it to a whole other stratosphere. And Jack Nicholson was smart to get a piece of that in his deal. I think he was the only actor who did.
Yeah.
This was like probably my favorite movie for years when it came out. I've watched this movie more times than I can count, and more times in one day than any other movie I've ever seen in my life.
I don't know if I could quote my statistic for that one, but I will say I largely agree with you. This is the other movie that I go back and forth with. It's this and Batman Returns for different reasons. This one has that emotional connection for me. We saw it a little bit younger. I don't think I saw it in theaters. I would have seen its network premiere a year later. Usually you had to wait a year or two to see these things on TV.
Right.
So I would have seen it probably at 8 years of age on TV. And it just sunk right in. Not only because of the movie, but there were action figures. I had the comic book adaptation. And you had all of the merchandise that we were surrounded by for probably a 2-year span at the very least.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And you're right about the vibe of it was very different from Batman 66. Obviously, that was way before our time. I think, well, we obviously had to come to appreciate that much later.
Yeah.
But this was something different for people. I also mentioned earlier some of the things that were happening in the comic book world. Frank Miller had put out The Dark Knight, which is a very dark take on Batman in the comics. This doesn't follow the Dark Knight storyline or anything, but it definitely takes notes from that sort of approach. And you add that into sort of the timeless Art Deco stylizing that Tim Burton put it in, and I love that. That was the biggest... earlier we talked about animation.
Yeah.
Batman the Animated Series definitely took most of its stylistic design inspirations from the Tim Burton Batman movies. This one stays very clean. It's not nearly as sort of gross or horror adjacent as Batman Returns is. Batman Returns is obviously
right,
but it is a much darker take on the character and superhero movies in general. I also mentioned earlier how this might have been the kickoff of the modern superhero movie adaptation. Obviously, Superman had come first, but Christopher Reeve's Superman, directed by Donner, could not be much different than the Tim Burton Batman movies of 89 and 92.
As it should be, I think. I think that's lost today is the fact that Superman and Batman are two different characters and depicted differently. And those movies were true to the characters. Now everybody wants to be Batman. So they can get in line.
Behind Batman 89 at the top of the list.
That's right.
Any other overall observations you want to make about the list before we call it a day?
I can't say I'm very surprised at the results. They're fairly spot on.
Yeah. Pretty predictable based on the conversations we've had about the Batman movies between us.
Right.
We try to stay objective on the show. I always talk about the rubric. I think it was unavoidable that we would suffer from some subjective bias here.
Yeah.
Obviously, you have Batman Returns near the top of the list. I think that we surprised ourselves with some of the scores that the Nolan movies got. Obviously, Joel Schumacher not doing so good. But I think this is a pretty accurate representation of what we think counts toward a quality Batman movie. And in that way, I think it is objective. Because if you ask me to design what a Batman movie should look like, I wouldn't necessarily tell you that it should be rooted so strongly to the real world like the Nolan movies are. Right. And for me, that's their biggest weakness, in my opinion, is how they insist on being very connected to the real world. Gotham just kind of looks like Chicago. Yeah. And I like sort of a parallel dimension American city that you see in the Tim Burton movies.
Yeah, I agree. I think that helps it be more comic booky and more timeless.
Timeless is a big deal, yep. Everybody's driving weird 1940s vehicles, but everybody also has computers, so.
That's the key.
All right, so I guess that's it for the Batman BAT-tle Royal. This has been Nerd Bomber vs. Movies. Obviously, you have found us right here on YouTube. We also do a podcast called the Nerd Bomber Podcast. You can find most of what we do on Instagram at Nerd Bomber Pod. And from there, you can find links to all the stuff we put out together, all the stuff that I put out, all the stuff that Claude puts out. For your friend Claude, I've been Just Jamie, and until the next battle,
aloha.
Please deposit litter in trash receptacles as you exit the auditorium. The perfect gift for any occasion, gift certificates are available at the box office. Thanks for visiting with us. Buckle up and drive safely. See you next week.